2 years ago, I walked into a job no one wanted, and I didn't realize at the time that the hardest part wouldn't be the technical work. It would be the feeling of being watched without being seen. The kind of attention that isn't curiosity or respect, but evaluation, measurement, as if every move I made was being silently scored. The project itself was already infamous inside the company. People talked about it in lowered voices. It had been passed around like a hot coal, each internal team touching it just long enough to get burned before finding an excuse to let it drop. That's why I was there, an external contractor, disposable insulation between the risk and the people whose names actually mattered. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been disrespected because you were outsider help, if you've ever fantasized about justice being served without you having to get your hands dirty, then you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to Taking Revenge Hour, and settle in. Because this isn't a story about shouting. This is a story about letting the truth speak while everyone watches. From day one, I felt the separation. Conversations stopped when I joined meetings early. Jokes landed but never included me. Decisions were almost final until I asked clarifying questions, and then suddenly needed more discussion. I told myself it was normal. Contractors are outsiders by design. We're not meant to be comfortable. We're meant to deliver and disappear. So I leaned into that. I showed up prepared, over-prepared. I double-checked everything, not because I was unsure of my skill, but because I knew something else was happening under the surface. This wasn't just about the work. It was about positioning. That's when he started making himself known. At first, it was subtle enough that I wondered if I was imagining it. A smirk when I spoke. A joke framed just vaguely enough to sound harmless unless you were the target. He had mastered that tone, friendly on the surface, dismissive underneath. The kind of person who could insult you and make it sound like he was doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. He never missed a chance to remind the room that I was temporary, that I wasn't one of them. He said contractor the way some people say problem, slowly, deliberately, as if the word itself carried weight. Every time he spoke over me, my jaw tightened. Every time he reframed my input as something obvious or derivative, I felt heat creep up my neck. But I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was paying attention. People like him thrive on reaction. They feed on defensiveness. They need you emotional so they can look composed, and I refused to give him that. Instead, I started documenting even more obsessively, not just what I delivered, but when. Not just what I asked for, but how long it took to get responses. I saved calendar invites, meeting notes, follow-up emails that went unanswered for days, sometimes weeks. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I didn't need to. This wasn't a complaint file, it was insurance. As weeks passed, the project began to strain, not because the work was hard, but because decisions were bottlenecked, requirements changed without warning, deadlines shifted quietly like furniture being rearranged in the dark, and every time something slipped, I felt the pressure tighten around my ribs. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation, because I could sense the narrative forming. I'd seen it before. When timelines collapse, blame doesn't fall on systems, it falls on people, and outsiders are always the easiest targets. I noticed the shift in meetings first, the way silence lingered a fraction longer after I spoke, the way eyes darted toward my video window when delays were mentioned, then quickly away. And I noticed him growing more relaxed, leaning back, folding his arms, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was worse than that. It was smug, like he was watching dominoes fall that he had lined up himself. The meeting where it all came to a head started like any other. Routine, predictable, status updates, minor clarifications, polite nods. Upper management was present, which always changed the temperature of the room. Voices became smoother, smiles more practiced. I could feel my pulse in my throat, even before anything happened. Then he spoke. Not hesitantly, not angrily, casually, as if stating a fact everyone already knew. And when he blamed the delays on my deliverables, something inside me dropped so fast it felt like gravity doubled. It wasn't just the lie, it was the confidence behind it. The assumption that no one would challenge him, that I wouldn't dare. My body reacted instantly. My palms went slick, my fingers curled involuntarily. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and insistent. I stared at my screen, forcing my expression to stay neutral while my thoughts raced. If I pushed back too hard, I'd look defensive. If I hesitated, I'd look guilty. There was no obvious right move. And that's when I understood the trap. He wasn't just lying, he was betting on my reaction, betting that pressure would make me crack. For a split second, I considered letting it go, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But then another thought surfaced, colder and steadier. If I let this slide, it wouldn't stop here. This would become the story, the version of events that followed me to performance reviews, contract renewals, quiet decisions made without my presence. Silence now would cost me later. So I did the one thing he wasn't expecting. I slowed down. I took a breath so deliberate it felt exaggerated. Let the panic settle just enough to think. And when I spoke, my voice surprised even me. Calm, even, almost detached. I suggested looking at the tracker together, framed it as clarification, not defense. And as I shared my screen, I could feel the tension coil tighter. There's something terrifying about letting evidence speak for you. No spin, no emotion. Just facts, dates, names, responsibilities. Each scroll felt like a second stretched thin. But with every row that passed, the balance shifted. I didn't rush. I didn't editorialize. I read what was there. And the more I read, the quieter the call became. Questions started coming, but not toward me, toward him. Clarifications he couldn't answer cleanly, explanations that contradicted each other. His voice changed, faster now, higher, less controlled. And then came the silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums, where no one wants to speak because everyone already understands what's happened. I said nothing. That was the hardest part, letting the moment exist without trying to soften it, because the truth doesn't need padding. When the meeting ended, the acknowledgement I received was brief, almost understated, but it landed heavier than any apology would have. From that day forward, his behavior changed, not dramatically, subtly, which told me everything. People who are truly confident don't adjust like that. People who've been exposed do. Over the next few weeks, the shift became impossible to ignore. He stopped speaking off the cuff, started sending follow-up emails to confirm conversations that used to be verbal. He asked for things in writing, double-checked timelines, and then, quietly, responsibilities began to move. Tasks that once funneled through him landed on my plate instead. Authority redistributed without announcement. No confrontation, no drama. Just a recalibration that spoke louder than any meeting ever could. I never confronted him afterward, never brought it up. There was no need. Every interaction after that carried the unspoken memory of that call, the hesitation before he commented on my work, the careful phrasing, the awareness that I was no longer an easy target. And that was the real payoff. Not humiliation, not revenge in the traditional sense, but safety. Validation, the knowledge that I could walk into meetings without bracing myself for impact. What changed wasn't him, not at first. It was the air around us. Conversations slowed. Jokes that used to land a little too close to cruelty stopped mid-sentence. His confidence, once effortless and unchecked, began to fracture into caution. He listened more, He interrupted less. He chose his words like someone suddenly aware that they could be repeated back to him, documented, remembered. People like him rely on something invisible, the assumption that no one is keeping track, that moments evaporate, that power resets every morning. They survive in the blur. And the moment you sharpen the edges, when you remember exactly what was said, when, and how, the blur disappears. What's left is accountability. And accountability terrifies people who've built themselves on plausible deniability. I didn't need to announce that shift. I didn't need to explain myself. Silence did the work for me. Silence, paired with certainty, is unsettling. It leaves no opening for argument, no emotion to dismiss, no reaction to reframe. He couldn't accuse me of being sensitive or dramatic or defensive because I wasn't any of those things. I was calm, consistent, precise. That calm wasn't natural to me at first. It was practiced, earned. There were nights when I replayed everything in my head, cataloging moments I had brushed off too easily before, times I'd laughed along because it felt safer, times I'd minimized my own discomfort because it seemed easier than risking conflict. Realizing that pattern was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. I began to notice how often power hides behind tone, how cruelty dresses itself up as humor, how dismissal wears the costume of efficiency. He hadn't been overt. That's what made it effective. No single moment was explosive enough to protest without sounding unreasonable. But taken together, they formed a pattern, a slow erosion of confidence disguised as feedback and standards. The call changed that because it stripped away the disguise. Hearing him repeat himself, unaware of the weight of his own words, unaware that the context had shifted, revealed something essential. He believed his version of events would always be the only one that mattered. That belief is fragile. It survives only as long as no one challenges the narrative, not loudly, not publicly, but structurally. I didn't challenge him in the moment because moments can be dismissed. I challenged the assumption beneath them, the assumption that he could say anything and it would dissolve the second it left his mouth. After that, I watched carefully, not him, but myself. I noticed how my posture changed, how I stopped rehearsing responses in advance, how I spoke with fewer qualifiers, not louder, clearer. There's a difference. Loudness seeks permission. Clarity assumes it. Others noticed too, even if they couldn't name it. The dynamic shifted subtly, the way tectonic plates do before an earthquake. No visible drama, just pressure redistributing. I was no longer the variable that could be adjusted without consequence. And here's the surprising part. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. That steadiness was new. It didn't come from winning. It came from knowing that if something happened again, I wouldn't freeze, knowing I didn't need to convince anyone in real time, knowing I had options that didn't require me to sacrifice my dignity for immediate relief. That kind of confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It simply exists. And people who rely on intimidation can sense it the way predators sense when prey stops running. They may not retreat entirely, but they become cautious, and caution changes behavior. Looking back, what stays with me isn't the satisfaction, it's the lesson that power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice, that patience isn't weakness when it's paired with preparation, and that sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who lies easily is give the truth enough space to breathe. Because when it doesn't just clear your name, it reveals theirs. There's a misconception that justice has to be dramatic to be real, that it needs witnesses, consequences, a clear winner and loser. But some of the most meaningful forms of justice are internal. They change how you move through the world. They remove the fear response you didn't even realize had become habitual. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get acknowledgement. I didn't get a moment where he looked at me and admitted fault. But I got something more durable: autonomy. I stopped needing his validation or fearing his disapproval. His opinion became just that, an opinion, not a verdict. And once that happened, his influence shrank. That's the part people don't talk about: how power collapses not when it's attacked, but when it's ignored, when it stops being the center of gravity around which you orbit, when you no longer orient your choices around avoiding someone's reaction. I didn't win by exposing him. I won by outgrowing the role he had assigned me, the role of the one who absorbs, who adapts, who smooths things over. I stepped out of it quietly, and without that role, his behavior had nowhere to land. If there's a warning embedded in all of this, it's not for people like him. It's for people like I used to be, the ones who confuse endurance with virtue, who believe that staying quiet is the same as staying professional, who think that strength only counts if it's visible. Sometimes strength is invisible until the moment it matters. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like waiting. And sometimes it looks like doing nothing at all, because doing nothing in the right context is the loudest statement you can make. I didn't confront him afterward. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its work, and I walked away with something far more valuable than revenge: the certainty that I could protect myself without becoming someone I didn't recognize.